This is just going to be a very casual conversation between two of our subject matter experts that we have today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Mike Watson. He is the VP of Engineering at CenterZip. So Mike, why don't you give us a start on what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. Thanks, Jill. As Jill said, I'm Mike Watson, VP of Engineering at CenterZip. With me on this panel is Mukund Rajmanar. And Mukund, will you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone. Hi. My name is Mukund. I've been with CenterZip for little more than a decade, and I've been practicing Agile software delivery ever since I joined CenterZip. So I'm happy to talk to Mike about the subject which is close to us on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey Mike, do you want to get started with a quick poll?
Yeah, let's do that, Jill. That sounds great.
So if you look in your polls, I'm asking, do you currently have a way to assess your Agile processes? Let me get it started. There we go. I think I'm showing the wrong screen now.
I see the poll. Yeah, so while everyone's taking the poll, just wanted to talk a little bit about the checklist, how it came about, what we use it for in CenterZip. So the Agile Checklist is a way for us to assess how we're doing in any one of our projects. We have a formal review process where we go through with the team members and ask them some questions and fill out the checklist to help us get a better picture of where we're at and where we need to go by seeing the risks that might be out there. So Jill, do you have some results from that poll?
Yes, we do.
All right, so
about 40% say yes, and we have a big percent that says, huh?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so let's dive into it a little bit more. So Jill, if you don't mind bringing up the
You want to see the checklist?
Self for a second. You have the ability to download it, as Jill said, and you can follow along there. It's you know, in a single page, it's actually, you know, pretty much an eye chart. So so the first thing we noticed when we started building this is that we started with the Agile practices, realizing that these practices are important. Some of them, sometimes we call those ceremonies or whatever. And what we realized, though, is the practices, although interesting, what we saw is there's a relationship to those practices and people owning those practices, and thus, you know, having this role structure. And what we found, and maybe Mukund can expand on this, is that frequently we found when there was missing roles, there was problems. So Mukund, can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, so in any project, people end up playing multiple roles, but they don't identify the role itself. And what we found in many cases is that if a role is not specifically identified and addressed, it doesn't work well. So the most common example would be that of, for example, of a product manager, where the product manager, you can hear me well, right? Yeah, where the product manager is responsible for taking stuff to market and making sure that the monetization and the user engagement, all these things happen as per the vision of the product, right? So when we form a team to build a product, many times are we really defining these roles consciously and making sure that things happen to the role. So that's something which we found that number of our clients didn't do when we engage with them, and then we talk them through it, and it has produced some pretty good results when when they realize that, oh, that's something which needs more focus.
Got it. So having a strong product manager that can communicate effectively is critical in your mind. Is that what you're saying? So Jill, with that, yeah, let's do another poll and see what people might find are missing in their Agile teams. What roles might be getting away from them. So Mukund, can you give us an example of maybe a project you've worked on and specifically how you saw that it wasn't working out well, but it improved when this happened? Some specific example would be helpful.
For specific example, let's take the role of, so we had a client, let's talk about product manager since I spoke about
let's
it just now.
stay on that topic. That's perfect.
Yeah, so we had a client in clinical trial financial management systems, CTFMS, right? Where the client was a startup and then there was a visionary who knew what he wanted to build. He had the domain expertise, he knew what he wanted. But then articulating that and having a go-to-market, he was doing it alone, right? So we spoke to him and then said, you know what, let's engage a product, let's bring in a product manager into the team. Doesn't matter from where. Once you bring a product manager to the team, the product manager was then able to pick up the domain knowledge, then come up and the technology which was going to be used. And then the founder was able to sync up with the product manager and augment the go-to-market strategy, right? So this helped the client actually build a product from ground zero. And we have quickly deployed the solution into clinical studies in geographically remote areas, right? So the things like, competitive analysis, market trends, advancement in clinical trials, and all of these, how they tune the product strategy for a successful go-to-market. These things were done by the product manager in the team, and that was quite successful. What are the roles? Okay.
Yeah, got it. That's helpful. So, Jill, do you have results from the second poll?
Sorry, I was
Yeah,
muted.
I see the results. It says, what are the roles, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering what the roles are.
Got it. Yeah, so let's talk through those roles in a little bit of detail. Can you go back to the chart? There you go. So you can see on the columns on the top, the roles we've identified as critical, and maybe this is a complete list for most teams, is obviously dev and QA. They're the backbone of making products, but also we have the product owner, a dev manager, Scrum Master, UI, UX, and DevOps. DevOps being the most interesting one to me because this is kind of a new concept of embedding someone who is responsible for the tooling, security, and also IT infrastructure like networking, embedding them directly into the teams. That's fairly new in the Agile world, and something that we found is very helpful on projects, especially if you can get DevOps started early to get the pipelines in place and everything moving forward. What do you think about that, Mukund?
Yeah, it's many people have a direct cloud native strategy, right? They launch their products directly on the cloud provider. And pretty much everyone in software development is aware of all the services cloud providers do. But there needs to be constant focus on what's new, what's coming out, how to optimize your cost, which services to use, and how to securely deploy your product in production, how to secure your source code. And everyone likes open source. How do you make sure that the right version of open source tools are used? If there is a high priority security fix in our dependency, do we make sure that that comes into the project? So the focus needs to be there for somebody to look at the entire aspect of production deployment, production monitoring. Do we have everything in there? And also make sure that the product which is being built is stable and all that. If we club that along with the developer role, the developer's role is to build functionality based on an architecture for a given specification. And the developer hat is different from somebody who's just focused on making sure things run well. And since we are moving to cloud native approach these days, and cloud service providers keep churning out new features every few months, it's really important for somebody to have that focus. So we find that DevOps does help. We have had examples where we managed to cut down costs for a customer who was in video streaming analytics. When we added a dedicated DevOps person with the the detailed knowledge of what it meant to run stuff at scale, the costing came down by about 30%, which was a huge saving. So DevOps is something which we find more and more in software development these days. That's a role which people really we need to focus on. Doesn't matter who does it, somebody needs to wear that hat.
I wonder real quickly how many of our listeners have DevOps as a role in their Scrum team. Can I do just a quick poll, just a yes or a no? While you banter about that, I just wonder how many people have it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, there's a trend to move to this world, but I would imagine that most people still don't track their stories, DevOps work stories directly in their ticketing system, on their Kanban board or their Scrum board, whatever they're using. That's my instinct, but I don't know. So this sort of indicates probably what I'm thinking is true. Most are not, truly integrating them into the team as part of the flow.
Yeah, we have 75% of our listeners do not have DevOps as a role.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But we have found great value out of that, especially with the cloud. Mukund, you had mentioned the costing. I mean, you always have to be, the cloud isn't a magical cost-free thing, as we all know. So someone has to be focused on that and making sure that we're making good architectural decisions that keep the costs in check, But that's a whole topic on its own that I don't want to dive too deep into. So Mukund, in your opinion, I mean, you've seen a lot of the good and a lot of the bad, maybe a little bit of ugly. What do you think the key roles are? Or maybe a better question to ask is, everyone has asks for dev and QA, and oftentimes product owner. But what do you think is critical for success? Is there one role that if you're missing, the whole thing kind of blows up in your mind? Outside of dev and QA.
Yeah, I think the product owner is responsible for success of the project, right? So it's up to the product owner to make sure that he has the right mix and making sure the backlog is prioritized and things are delivered to requirement. So, I mean, apart from being the person to blame, I think the product owner is a key role. A lot of develop teams these days don't believe in QA. They say that, we deploy continuously, we deliver, we go ahead of the developers write well-tested code, so we don't really need a QA. We are a startup. That kind of an argument I see a lot from some startups these days. But in my personal opinion, the happy path is pretty much what the developer really focuses on. And there are so many obscure scenarios that the mindset of a QA is totally different. And I think that, fortunately or unfortunately, is being lost in translation these days. Developers don't write code and then think of how can I go and break my own flow. So that's something which I think QA is a critical part of it, but I think that is become a bit of a challenge. All roles are pretty interesting and they help in success in different ways. The problem of not having a role, even something as obscure as a user experience, for example, that can be the differentiator between success and failure. So I think in general, there are risks associated with not having specific roles in the team. And I think a decision has to be made of what risk is, which risk can be taken on and which should be mitigated. I don't see one role as being the superb one.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I do have a question from somebody in the audience. Sabu, I'm going to unmute you. If you want to go ahead and ask your question, everybody will be able to hear you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Jill. So my question was basically the DevOps role. Is it continuously needed forever, assuming that the build and test and the release processes are well hashed out in a team and the team is in a stable state in churning out features and defect fixes over time? Do you still need a DevOps role, part-time or full-time on the team?
I would think that, yeah, let me take that and Mike can pick it up. So I would say that at least at the start, you need a full-time person until you go into production and you make sure things are running stable. And secondly, if you're doing a business to B2C, and then you anticipate changes in load and whatnot, then you really need to have that bandwidth in your team to make sure that you're able to handle the fluctuations in production. In B2B, less so. At some point of time, you can bring that down to a partial requirement. But that role is critical irrespective of where you are in the product life cycle, even if you're in the maintenance space.
Yeah.
Security is a big topic, and somebody needs to wear that hat. It's not always the chief security officer who's going to dictate terms for the organization. Somebody in the team needs to be wearing that hat too. So.
Yeah, I mean that's actually one of the things that we haven't hit on yet, but these roles will be taken up by somebody, right? When production comes and you need to scale the system, a developer at a minimum will probably have to go and figure out how to do that. And so you're certainly better off if you can afford to put on your team someone that's focused on that, so that you don't distract the developer from actually writing more code and producing more business value, right? So one of the risks of not having a role is that you force that upon someone else who may have a different job, right? And if you get a small enough team, they might have 3, 4, 5 different roles that they're playing, and it'd be very difficult to context switch and be successful in all those areas. So, my answer is someone will be doing it, and you have to decide as an organization whether it's worth the risk of pulling away a developer in this case to manage that, or if you want to invest to keep the balance.
Another question that just came in, I'm having a hard time unmuting this person, but they ask, in y'all's experience, what roles do you find that are most commonly missed, and what would be the risks of those roles being missed?
Yeah, that's similar to the question we asked, but different, because it's saying what do we see out there, right? Yes. Yeah. Mukund, the subtle difference there is, when you are working with engagements and on projects, do you find a particular role is commonly missed, like overlooked or thought not as important?
I don't think there is one specific role. DevOps being new, I mean, a lot of people don't think about it as a separate role. But then it really depends on the team composition before they engage with you, or when you form the team, who are the core members of the team already. So when a core team is formed, most of the times, all the critical components are there. But if a few roles are missing, then I have seen that changes from project to project. It all depends on what's the core team that is put together. I haven't seen one particular role taking the hit.
When we were talking yesterday or a couple days ago, just the three of us, we had talked about the role of the Scrum Master. And you said a lot of times there isn't a dedicated Scrum Master because everybody says, oh, we can just do it ourselves. Do you find that projects go awry if there's not a dedicated Scrum Master?
I think a Scrum Master is somebody like IT support, in my opinion. I mean, that's a bad analogy, but when things work, nobody notices that role. But a Scrum Master is really the person who's holding the fort at the end of the day, making sure that your agile routines are followed, making sure that things are on track, and the discipline is there. I think that role is inherent to teams. I've seen some teams where people share it on a rotational basis because one person doesn't want to play that role on every day, right? But that role is always there in teams, in my opinion. Even if you don't declare somebody to be a Scrum Master, I find that people naturally take that up because it generally is chaos otherwise.
Yeah, I have a similar thought there, where really, if you want to mature as an organization, if you want your agile practices to get better, the Scrum Master is a great person to drive and drive that improvement process, right? drive the retrospectives, make sure action items are being followed up on related to process improvement. Because without that, I mean, that does fall, the dev manager can take on that responsibility, but there's, having someone that's just fully responsible for that is very helpful. Making sure people are following all the agreements they've already made, like updating tickets regularly or moving cards appropriately from lane to lane, and running the meetings effectively. So these are all things that Scrum Masters help that are subtle, but definitely improve your overall capabilities if you have that role.
Sabu in our audience does have another question. Sabu, you're unmuted. You want to give a call out?
Sure. So how do you handle constant interruptions from customer success or support teams for a product development Scrum team? Like to support the product in production, there's an issue that comes up, that came up, that need to be handled. So how do you handle such constant interruptions in a Scrum team? And in such a case, how do you motivate the team that they have to achieve the sprint goals that they had signed up for? Thank you.
Yeah, interesting question there, Subu. So I think this is team by team specific, but my general feeling about this question, Mukund, you please expand on this, is that has to flow through like the product owner, and it has to be prioritized like anything else. Now, of course, it could go to urgent, must do next priority, but that should be just part of the flow. It should be built into your process of how you're going to address these types of tickets. As far as motivation, I mean, there's a lot written on that. I think rewarding successful outcomes is always a good thing. I just got a new puppy, and that's what we're being taught to do to train our puppies. So I think that also works really well on humans, not to simplify the problem, but I think if you have one of these production issues and you solve it and you get good feedback that you did it quickly and effectively and the customer's happy. I mean, in my experience from the past, being a developer, that always made me feel good. So I think just building on those positive experiences and really emphasizing them is very helpful. Mukund, do you have any thoughts on that?
Some projects, products which we built, there is always this technical debt which is there in the backlog. And sometimes what I have seen happen is that those don't get addressed because the value which is achieved by building a new feature is more shiny than a technical debt that isn't customer impacting at some point in time. And after a certain point of time, the technical debt is so large that when things break, it becomes a periodic event, right? You fix this, and then next week something else goes wrong. Your database has a major issue or things like that. So one of the things which we have found works well is you work with the client and make sure that the product owner, tell them that hey, allocate some bandwidth for technical debt on an ongoing basis so that we can stabilize the product a little better. And that way, when interruptions happen, obviously SLAs have to be met, so interruptions will happen. They will get addressed, and if the sprint deliver, if 2 stories have to move out of the sprint because you took on some technical debt to be fixed, your schedule is going to get hit. I mean, but on the other hand, I don't think people are going to stop trying to fix production issues, right? But yeah, I mean, prioritizing the backlog, I think it really falls on the product owner. You need to sneak in a few technical debt items as part of feature. So in a sprint, maybe a couple of stories out of 10 could be for fixing stuff. That helps.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mukund. I think another motivator is when there are problems like technical debt that are really frustrating the team, being able to eliminate some of that, even if it's a small win, get that into the backlog, solve some problems so that they feel like their needs are being met in terms of that frustration.
I do have another question from an audience member. Pankaj, I've just unmuted you. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Mike and Mukund, for sharing your Agile checklist. So the question I have in the Scrum team in this context, development, QA, you guys talked about DevOps. Can you talk a little bit about development manager role as it listed here? What role does that play? Is that a must role, or what do you see in projects you do? Mukund, I'll ask you.
I think that's more referring to the product manager, as opposed to, I mean, to avoid confusion with the product owner, I think we use the term development manager, but that mostly is the product manager who's going to make sure that the focus is there on delivering the product to the market. So that depends on the go-to-market strategy, making sure that the monetization plans are in place, making sure that the release schedules are in place and all that. So that's what we mean by the product manager / development manager at that point of time. There is a owner, then there's a product manager who helps the owner with taking that vision to the market. And then you have a product owner who owns the backlog and make sure things are prioritized and things actually get delivered as per the requirements. So this the role is on the top there, next to the the business owner.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about dev managers and product managers. I've been a dev manager for a long time, and I coached dev managers as a the next level up director and VP of engineering. And the role actually ends up being sort of a catch-all for anything that's being missed. So, but also the job is to motivate the people, make sure that they're playing in the right role and their success is being met, removing roadblocks, things like that. Now, the Scrum Master many times can take on some of this. And a lot of times in a small team, the Dev Master or the Dev Manager and the Scrum Master are the same person, right? Like those roles get clubbed together very naturally. But I would think the Dev Manager's role here is to make sure that everything is working, right? Like that the pieces are all coming together, that the constituent teams like product management, support, teams that are outside of the realm of this team are also getting their inputs and making key decisions to move the ball forward. Because not everything can be decided within this sprint team, right? You have to, there's lots of interactions in the outside world that have to be focused back in. And a dev manager, differently than a Scrum Master, can really focus on helping in that area.
While we're still talking about the roles, I have another audience member, Brooke, who has a question on the same topic. Brooke, I've unmuted you. Do you want to ask your question? Brooke, are you still there? She had, like, when speaking about, adding release managers and our change management practitioners to an Agile team, are those resources pulled in ad hoc?
So you're talking about release managers, and what was the other role?
Management practitioners.
Okay. Yeah. So some processes have sort of an umbrella on top of, like, especially if you're in a bigger organization, might have an umbrella of roles outside of the actual sprint team that are helping produce the product, right? Getting the product out the door, right? So a release manager's job is really to take what is considered finished product and make sure it actually has everything it needs to become something that can be done in the real world. My experience with release managers has primarily, like I say, been in large organizations where you have to pull together, documentation teams and maybe marketing and other types of teams to, to get more than just the code out the door. You're getting a whole product out the door, maybe go-to-market type concerns and such like that. So I think they play outside of this, but again, when I was talking about the world that we have to interact with inside of these teams, that would be one of those interactions. Is working with the release manager to figure out what their objectives are, how we can help them meet them, et cetera, et cetera.
So that would be more of the dev manager taking on the liaising between all the different wings of the organization to make sure that things are delivered as per standard.
Yeah,
right?
and the product manager probably plays a role there too, because a lot of a lot of what a release manager needs outside of the code comes from, product definition and, how do we communicate this to the market and things like that. So the product manager and the dev manager definitely play a role there.
And going back to, I guess people are starting to download the checklist and are really looking at it. A couple people have asked, if they're trying to convince all the engineering stakeholders to adopt an agile process, can this checklist help, and how can it help?
Do you want me to take that, Mukund? Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that this has done for us internally is it's shining the light on the problems that are already kind of well known, and it gives us a way to say, look, if we were to do these things, like adopt this practice and have this role in place, we can actually eliminate this problem that we all know exists, right? So it's kind of a roadmap to success in a way. So that's how I would use it, and that's definitely how we've used it within Synerzip, and I've seen great success there.
Yeah, most of our clients are able to identify, they're able to correlate with the risk. If the team is suffering from a symptom, then they're able to see, yeah, I have this problem, very different variation of the problem, and then they're able to see, oh, so you're telling me that this person might be able to mitigate this. Then the conversation starts on how does that happen. So if you take that to any team, I think just validating the processes that they follow at any point of time is good. Agile is all about low process, but on the other hand, there is some level of discipline and ownership which needs to be there, and that helps. It helps to make sure that you're doing it.
Can you apply this checklist to a team that's not agile?
Well, you can. Yeah, that was actually what I was about ready to talk about. Is if you look at any team and you apply the checklist, it's going to apply at some level, right? And like I say, if you review that team, you might find, these are our risks. And if you have to be a non-agile, or you have certain restrictions that force you to have certain, waterfall-like processes, like maybe you're manufacturing medical equipment or something like that, and the test rigor has to be much higher than if you're making a mobile app for for e-commerce or something. There's certain parts of e-commerce apps that are really critical, like the actual payment part, but like a lot of it, if it didn't work just right, it's not a big deal. But in medical, you don't want it to maybe work correctly. So in those environments, and we've actually dealt with a client with that type of restriction, we applied the checklist so that we could find the risks, and then we used those risks and mitigated them. We put a mitigation strategy against each risk to say, okay, well, we have this thing that's potentially going to be a problem for us, like maybe it's predictability of delivery or something like that. We put mitigations around that, so we make sure that we didn't get exposed by that risk. So I do think it's useful, especially if you're planning on adopting Agile. It can be very useful to say, oh, where should we focus, right? Instead of taking like a big leap forward, maybe you can take baby steps by understanding which risks you want to knock off first.
Excellent. That's all the questions that I'm getting from the audience. Do you guys have anything else to wrap this up?
Well, Mukund, I just have one last question. From my seat, I feel like this checklist is really helping us, our organization, move the ball forward and get better. How do you feel? Do you feel the same?
Yes. So when it helps in a couple of ways, right? Obviously, it helps the team succeed better, but it also helps management look at risk areas at a collective level to see, where more attention needs to be given. And we did our internal analysis on different products that we built for different customers, whatnot. And we found that when certain roles are missing, which we consider are, critical, we found that by doing analysis of what happened in the last couple of years when we bought this checklist up, we found that yes, when we said this thing should go wrong, yes, it went wrong in that project. So there is some validation for the risks which are documented here, and it has helped have a conversation with the customers to kind of explain to them why things are happening the way they are happening and how things can be done better. So it's helpful.
Yeah, so I think those of you out there that are listening could use this also to talk to your constituents. Maybe you don't have customers, as Mukund was talking about it, but you could go to your constituents and say, hey, I went through this checklist and I think here's our weaknesses, and maybe we should shore these things up. So I do think it could be effective for any organization.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I know you both have offered to answer questions after this is over. Let me just share your contact info. There you go. There's Mike and Mike's email and Mukund's email address. I'll also send this out to everybody in an email. But thank you both very much. This zip chat is supposed to be just a quick little 30, 40-minute conversation between subject matter experts and interactive with our audience. And I think we have achieved that today. So thank you very much. And Mukund, thank you for staying up so late. I know it's a little late there in India, but I really appreciate it. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Mukund.
Yeah, thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Jen.
Nice talking to you, Mukund. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.